Welcome back. Turning to a busy day on the campaign trail with less than a month until Election Day. At this hour, former President Trump is holding a rally in battleground Pennsylvania. He's continuing his attack on the federal hurricane response, calling the Helene response the worst rescue operation in history without any evidence. And for the second election cycle in a row, Mr. Trump is facing the fallout from a Bob Woodward book. This time, Woodward reports Trump sent Russian leader Vladimir Putin scarcely available COVID tests during the height of the pandemic. According to Bloomberg, the Kremlin has confirmed that reporting. The book also says that the former president and Putin have talked several times since he left the White House. Here's Mr. Trump's reaction to that reporting.
He said was that you've had a number of conversations with Putin. Is that true? I mean, I imagine that could be.
No?
That's
false.
Oh, really?
That's false.
So you haven't spoken to him since you left the White House?
No, I have not.
And the other.
False.
Meanwhile, as we mentioned earlier, Vice President Harris attended a hurricane briefing virtually today and did some phone interviews before hitting the trail for Nevada. It comes amid a media blitz with an appearance last night on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, where she again was unable to give a direct answer about how her administration would be different from Joe Biden's. Listen.
You are a member of the president's administration. Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I noticed.
And so that would be one change
Yes.
in terms of...
Yes.
But also, I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump. And so when we think about the significance of what this next generation of leadership looks like, were I to be elected president, it is about... Frankly, I love the American people, and I believe in our country.
I want to turn now to our NBC News correspondents covering the campaigns. Monica Alba is covering Vice President Harris, and Dasha Burns is at the Trump rally in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Monica, let me turn to you. Look, that's the second time that the vice president got that question this week. What is the campaign saying about her strategy in answering it? Do they have any plans to change strategy, or are they satisfied with that answer that has, by the way, gotten critiqued by Donald Trump?
Yeah, and it was notable also, Kristen, that she was asked this exact question earlier in the day. And at the time, she said, well, there's nothing that really comes to mind because I was a part of those big decisions. And then in that same interview, a few moments later, she said, actually, I want to revise that. And there is one thing I would do differently. And she suggested that she would appoint a Republican to her cabinet if elected, saying that pride wouldn't get in the way of something like that. So that was one kind of example that seemed to come a little bit later in the course of that interview. But then, yes, when she was posed with that exact same question again later in the day, she didn't really talk about that and instead reverted back to a line that she delivered during her debate against Donald Trump, where she said, I'm not Joe Biden and I'm not Donald Trump. And it's something that her campaign is keenly aware of strategically is an important moment where she feels she needs to define herself separately from President Biden while making sure to praise his leadership and still stay strategically aligned with what they view and what they tout as the Biden-Harris administration accomplishments. But I think you can expect her in the days and weeks ahead, in the limited time she has left, to continue to make a point of where there may be some differences, where there could be some distance. And they're trying to do that by focusing on the future and what she would do as a leader if she's elected, instead of looking at the past. But again, they know that this is kind of a fragile relationship where she's still the sitting vice president, and she wants to be sure to not put any kind of a negative light on the current president, who was the one who got out of the way, so that she could be the Democratic nominee. But also in a moment when you're responding to the storm and this massive crisis in the country, that's another reason that the campaign is arguing she's, of course, not going to put that much distance between herself and President Biden at this moment, even if that's something that they know she may need to do in the later weeks. Kristen.
It's such a fascinating point, Monica, because here we are, the country, Florida, bracing for this historic storm, Milton, to make landfall. And of course, the politics of how leaders handle a storm can impact the election. Today, the vice president getting briefed on the storm, also calling into some news outlets. What has her message been today, Monica?
Yeah, and they featured her pretty prominently in this briefing that was made available to the public. Everybody could watch it with the president. She joined remotely because she was in New York, and now she's on her way to Las Vegas, Nevada for campaign events. And she's going to be heading after that to Arizona, we understand, for more campaigning on Friday. So despite the president canceling and postponing his overseas travel so that he can be manning the response and the entirety of the federal government operation in regards to Milton, the vice president is saying that she's doing that while also heading to the campaign trail. And she, at this point at least, hasn't moved those kinds of events. There's a question about whether that could shift, but she's trying to do both of these things because remember last week when Hurricane Helene was hitting, she did adjust her schedule somewhat and certain events got moved around. And they know that with so few days left, they have very, very precious real estate and time to get that message out in some of the battleground states. So they want to be able to do both. But she also wants to be seen as somebody who is playing a key role in the response as long as the response is, in the view of critics, going well. And that is something that after Helene, she was also criticized for by some people in terms of maybe she wasn't as involved as she could have been. And her team argued that, well, it was up to the president, but certainly she's a partner to the president, and that she has been on some of these key calls, which I think we can expect to see. And she has been the one trying to spread that message also about the misinformation, the disinformation, and calling out people like former President Trump for their messaging, calling him utterly irresponsible, and others who have spread information when it came to Hurricane Helene. If that repeats with Hurricane Milton, I think we can see her and expect her to do the same.
Monica, Alba, thank you so much for your fantastic reporting. As always, we really appreciate it. Great to see you. We want to turn now to a really disturbing story ahead of the election. An Afghan national living in Oklahoma was charged this week with conspiring to carry out a terrorist attack on Election Day on behalf of ISIS. That's according to newly unsealed court documents. The 27-year-old defendant and a juvenile co-conspirator were arrested after meeting with an undercover FBI agent while attempting to buy weapons. According to the Justice Department, the 27-year-old confirmed that he was intending to target large gatherings on Election Day. Joining me now with more is NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian. Ken, thanks for being here. So take us inside your reporting. What are you learning about how authorities actually uncovered this plot?
So the FBI has not spelled that out in the charging documents, but they made it clear that he left some clues, including a contribution that he made to a charity that was essentially a front for ISIS, and a lot of engagement with ISIS propaganda online. So that is possibly a way that the FBI got onto him. And then once they were onto him, they dangled some confidential sources in front of him to set up this buy of rifles and other ammunition and other things. The FBI had control of the plot the whole time. It's not even clear exactly what he was targeting, but he did say after he was arrested, he confessed that he planned to carry out an attack on Election Day, wanted a lot of casualties, and he planned for it to be a suicide attack, Kristen.
Well, it's just absolutely chilling. And we know that the Trump campaign is already pouncing on this. Republicans saying, look, this is a sign of the weak immigration system that we have in place. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, this is an interesting dimension here. The charging document said that he entered the country on a special immigrant visa, which is a visa given to Afghans who worked for U.S. forces. But we found out today that that's not accurate. He actually came in under humanitarian parole, and he entered the country just less than a month before the chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan was completed. So there's some belief that he may have gotten in here with very little vetting under a system where a lot of Afghans were coming into the country during a very chaotic period. There's a lot of questions still to be answered on this, but you're absolutely right. The Trump campaign is pointing the finger and saying, wait a second here. And frankly, the U.S. government is not really answering some fundamental questions at this hour.
Well, I know you'll stay on top of all of this. Ken Dilanian, thanks so much. Great to see you, as always. Joining me now with the very latest from the Trump campaign's rally in Pennsylvania is Dasha Burns. Dasha, thanks for being here. So tell us what your headlines are so far from the Trump rally there.
Well, look, Kristen, the former president is speaking behind me right now, and I will tell you the more aggressive rhetoric is really ramping up with these 27 days left to go to Election Day. He's been bashing Harris, insulting her intelligence. The words stupid and dumb and incompetent have been used over and over again today. He played a video, the clip of Harris on The View that you were talking about with Monica earlier, where she didn't have an answer for how she would have done things differently than President Biden. He has also continued his misleading statements about FEMA and the hurricane response. Take a listen.
She's just led the worst rescue operation in history in North Carolina. The worst. And we have another big one coming in, but the worst, the one in North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Virginia. It was pieces of Florida got hit. I mean, it's incredible. The worst ever, they say. They had no money. You know where they gave the money? To illegal immigrants coming in, many of whom are killers. Tim said they want to abolish the Electoral College.
Kristen, he also played a odd new video that was meant to contrast the military under Trump versus under this administration. It was a then and now video, but the clips of the then were from the movie Full Metal Jacket, and the now clips were what seemed to be clips of military members in drag on TikTok. He also dug into the issue of energy, which is, of course, critical to Pennsylvania, saying that he's going to save the fracking and energy industry here in the Keystone State. For context, though, I'll remind our viewers that right now, America is producing more oil than at any point in history, Kristen.
Dasha Burns, I know it's always tough to talk when there's a rally underway. Well done. Thank you so much for the great information.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.